talking about chapter 39, which is the second track for the album. And in the meantime, drinking Highlands Brewing their oatmeal porter. It's, it's supposed to be smooth, but it's kind of malty. Which that isn't like a negative statement or anything like that. It's just, I don't know, just a little malty flavor. So cheers to that. So let's get right into it. The second track is called Auteur and the Oval Table. And kind of gonna go a little out of order for like the overview for this, because some of the like major references of it really is kind of required as to like the actual story of what's going on with this. So before we get into that sort of thing, I want to talk about the music itself first. And the music for this song, when I started, working on this stuff like back in late November, early December, like I had the previous song, the first track, which talked about in the previous video, but kind of at the same time that I was, re-recording that, I was also starting on this song, and I wouldn't say I was feeling burnt out necessarily. I was ready to get to working on volume 5 songs. I just didn't know or feel necessarily like instant inspiration, to write like the second song. So I had to look back to like 13 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And basically what I did to write this song was I took like 5 or 6 song demos that I wrote in my mid-20s, like back in 2009, 2010, somewhere in there. I just wrote some guitar demos or whatever with some pretty not good recording equipment that I was using at the time. And I took those 5 or 6 songs and had them in like a wave format, I think, and just imported them into my current software, and cut some things, move some parts around, deleted things that I was like, this isn't needed, and basically took 5 or 6 songs and compiled it into one, like 8.5 minute or whatever track. And parts of it were hard because the recording quality was just terrible for some of those demos. I mean, terrible. It's just noise almost, just a lot of treble, and really hard to kind of discern specific rhythms or specific notes that I was playing. And from there, I set sort of a metronome track and started laying down drums and just sort of quantizing the demos as I went along to try to make it fit into the specific timing. And I think there's 2 or 3 uh, like time changes in the song. Not necessarily like the going from 3/4, 4/8, 4/4, and not necessarily that, but more of like the tempo or the BPMs themselves. And for the most part, uh, I would say like 85% of the song is in the tempo that it needs to be in. But there were a couple of parts that I think they either got slowed down in the process or got sped up, and it just didn't have the exact same feel that like the demos did. But at that point it's like, well, I've already laid down the drums, just gonna try to figure it out as I record it and just kind of be done with it. And I couldn't find any like notes or tablatures of me writing down those demos from like 13 years ago. So I had to kind of refigure out how to play these songs and write those tablatures down so that I knew what I was playing. But for the most part, the whole song's just metal, just metal core, I guess. So, other than like one section towards the end of the song where it kind of becomes quieter, not necessarily quieter, but less metal. It's just a straightforward metal ass beater kind of song. So this song specifically, the like literal meaning, the story of it, everybody within this tribe or collective, whatever you want to call it, has come together in a meeting. The character Auteur has called everybody together in this room, not long after the wedding ceremony, and Auteur wants everybody to speak and bring their views and opinions, but talk about societal problems and talk about how they can escape from this prison facility and like what kind of like necessary steps they need to take. So the title itself, Auteur and the Oval Table, really is just kind of a tongue-in-cheek reference to King Arthur and the Round Table. It's sort of supposed to be this kind of same thing. Of all these characters coming together for a common purpose and for a common good. And one of the things that I wanted to tongue-in-cheek, at least to myself, deal with within this song was to include certain keywords or buzzwords that have come into like the collective consciousness of like cultural debates. These words that I personally find annoying, which I can sort of point out maybe later on, but just these buzzwords or keywords that I just think are ridiculous. I guess I can give a quick one if looking over like the lyrics, stuff. Okay, like branding that has become like sort of a cultural buzzword for the United States, and branding of like content creation, and also like branding as in personal branding of like branding yourself to get a job or whatever. Like that is completely crazy to me, but it's something that a lot of people talk about. Things like blame the patriarchy. That was one word that I threw in there. Trying to find other ones. Even something as simple as like dictator, inequality, groupthink, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with these words at all, but the fact that like over the last 3.5 years or so, they've become words that are almost like militarized among certain people it's just weird to me. Frontline, like part of the pandemic, it just, that's weird to me. Navigating change, that was one. Supremacy, unprecedented times, that was towards like the very beginning of the song. How like a phrase like unprecedented times, just you started hearing it so much within society, whether it's on Facebook or whether it's in advertisements or the news or whatever. It's just like, y'all are like, this is kind of weird. But anyway, moving on. So to understand as kind of like a motif and a structure for the song, because like the entirety of the song is each member of the tribe taking turns speaking and giving their specific viewpoints. But I have to give a shout out to my friend and the pastor of the church that I go to, dude named Dan, sup dog. A few months ago, he spoke about this in a sermon, but and I've told him this in years past, but the church I go to now, I actually visited it on one occasion back in 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. Just and for people who knew me at that time knew that I visited a number of different churches and institutions back in like 2010, and this sort of became part of that, but sort of after the fact. My church was actually one of the final places that I ended up visiting at the time that I basically wrote that book. It's almost like a comparative analysis of sorts of different like churches, denominations, and whatnot. Just different religious institutions in general. And when I visited the church back then, I remember he was going through like a sermon series dealing with this exact subject. So I, came to hear about it, understand it, all those years ago. But then he sort of brought it up again a few months ago, and not really in passing, but sort of going into, I guess, like how his personal views of this stuff have changed. So the concept that he was talking about, and thus how I lyrically fashioned this song, is based on what's called the Seven Mountains Mandate. And in my opinion, it's a pretty simple idea. I don't think there's anything overly complicated about it. To me, it's just a way of categorizing different different aspects or areas within society and culture of influence. So like this mandate, from what I've looked up, researched, was specifically like an evangelical and Pentecostal movement of sorts, and it focused on, I guess, what is called dominionism and conservatism. What that means exactly, whatever. Dominionism, I guess, is the idea of like having dominance of influence within culture, that like Christianity and Christians in particular are meant to be rulers, or at the very least to have positive impact in the overall culture and influencing it for the better. And so like from research, apparently it goes all the way back to teachings from Lauren Cunningham and Bill Bright, and even Francis Schaeffer. I forgot about that. But like back in the mid 1970s, and it charging people to invade these seven spheres, or what they call mountains of society. And people claim that it was in reference to Revelation 17:9. So anyway, for this song, I used it more as a motif in some ways of dealing with these realms of influence within culture. And so each character and speaker represents, or represents and takes on one of these seven mountains. And okay, so there are, I guess, technically 8 characters within this story, within this tribe, if you will. And there's only 7 mountains, and I didn't even like consciously set it up that way or anything, of there being 8, but it's just kind of weird that my pastor Dan, a few months ago, and like I guess it was back in May or so, his like idea with this thing had sort of changed, that he saw that there was an 8th mountain, and that this 8th mountain kind of represents the personhood of Jesus Christ himself, and his Jesus like specifically influencing the culture. And so with there being 8 characters within the tribe. Um, one of the characters kind of ends up uh, representing that in a way, uh, or maybe like kind of even doubt of its efficacy, the efficacy of the idea of these 7 mountains, but still kind of talking about like the ideas of influence and whatnot. I have written down here, and I honestly, it was just kind of a cursory looking over, not like diving deep into this mandate and whatnot, but from what I did see in my cursory research is that like some evangelicals believe that by fulfilling this mandate will bring about like the end times and Jesus' return and things of that nature. And honestly, that's kind of weird to me. And I can't speak for Dan or anybody at my church or anything. I can say that like he's never gone there with it from what I've seen, but I know some people kind of get weird into eschatology when it comes to this stuff. So, I want to stay away from that and just use it on a surface level idea of these different categories within society and culture, pertaining to influence. So these 7 mountains I have listed here as quickly going through it as being family, religion, education, media, entertainment, business, and government. I did see that a more recent view puts media and entertainment together and then adds science as like a 7th one. So for that, I'd go with that more modern model for it with science being included. And with that, it's kind of like media, entertainment, and the arts kind of go hand in hand together. So the song starts out with Auteur speaking and with him like ending it. The very beginning, Auteur says a meeting, a tribe to uphold democracy. So he's essentially saying that they're a democratic tribe, that there's a meeting going on here, and that they're bound together. We agreed the need to escape the powerless individual, a collective for freedom's sake. And so that's saying that they need to come together and to escape, not just like just being individuals and being alone, but also it's in reference to escaping the prison itself, even though that isn't like explicitly said, but that is the implication that he's saying. But he says, but the house of achievements, societal bereavements, methodologies, plan making, whether to impale or travail, each person must argue as a census together, coming towards a consensus. So that's he's setting up, hey, we're coming together as individuals to make arguments on how to like become a more effective collective as a tribe, but also like how the hell are we supposed to get out of this prison, and like what kind of like how do we do it, what methodologies, etc. Um, so like the I don't think I put it in specific order here, but like I said, each character represents a mountain, and within that character speaking, I wanted it to sort of deal with things more like philosophically, as almost like a philosophical argument of them saying a problema is how I have it written down in my notes, like a problema. And I'm, reading like Kierkegaard specifically, he would, in a couple of his books, kind of write out what he wrote specifically as a problema and, a problem, and then like a solution. And so that's what's going on here. And each problem dealing with that mountain of influence within society is something that I personally see it as a problem that sort of gets under my skin. And it's not necessarily anything that I find other people talking about necessarily, but it's just things that I have come to, see as like dissolution of these things within these mountains of society. So going through each one, the first one that I have written down here, and I think this is out of order, honestly, but I have written down the character of Eugene, and he specifically deals with the mountain of like the family structure and the influence of family within society. And so the problema that I have written down that I wanted to tackle with his section is the dissolution of any form of any kind of family, nuclear or otherwise. That like specifically the word family is no longer a mutually exclusive term, but that it's like trivialized to describe relationships that really aren't family at all. So like, for example, for me, a gym family, like that, I would go into the gym, like a couple of years back, and people that like I genuinely like would talk about, like in passing, the people within the gym being a family. And it's like, well, we're all paying, $25, $30, whatever dollars a month to be part of this family. That's weird. And, I go there to work out, to put in work, and I have very few people I interact with or have like any sense of friendship or relationship in general with. So like talking about these people as being a family is just absurd to me. And so like with that, among like actual families, roles and relational dynamics, or like a relationship itself being specifically defined, it's just not explicit within our society anymore. Basically, when people talk about being a family, I don't know what the hell most people are talking about. Simple as that. And so the solution that I want to deal with in that particular section is that like Eugene makes the argument to fight for what they believe in no matter what the cost is, and that violence is justified into getting their release. Now, saying that, is something that I personally don't agree with, but I can see a lot of people make points that, hey, a lot of times violence is justified. And I personally think, violence may indeed have its place. Actually, I'm pretty sure it does at times. Like I've said before, it's like a final resort with someone that, isn't going to necessarily listen to reason at all. But that's something that I personally don't like to focus on it at all. But for the character of Eugene, that is what he's essentially saying when it comes to like the solution of how they get out of this prison. The literal prison that they're in, and within like viewing the civilization that they're part of as being their own prison of sorts, like a macro prison of sorts, that violence is justified in finding escape from that problem. So the second one I have is dealing with the character known as the Catechist, and they're dealing specifically with the mountain of education as an influence within society. And so the Catechist is saying that intelligence, merit, logical arguments have been hijacked by emotion and political and ideological bias, which is something I personally 100% believe. The Catechist mentions that the solution is that they need to outsmart their oppressors by their like plan making and ingenuity, and basically that they need to become engineers of like a breakout, that they have to have like a specific plan and like a systematic sort of approach to it. The third mountain is government, and that is through Lady Elm as the speaker dealing with that. And it just sort of worked out this way that, as I've said before, Lady Elm is sort of a political prisoner, has some sort of loyalty in her past, and so like her being like the speaker for the mountain of government, it just sort of naturally worked out that way. Like I didn't honestly put super amounts of thought into planning it. It just sort of came about as I wrote it, which is cool when things come together that way and you're like, oh, it just sort of naturally happened. That's always fun. So the problema that Lady Elm gets into is that the view in society in general that resistance is futile, that people are expected to conform to majority in groupthink, well, actually being ruled by a minority or oligarchy, which is, that's something I personally think of, that it's kind of like collectivism while there's just a small group at the very top that are actually making real decisions. not talking about like the Illuminati or anything like that, but whether it's like a specific group of people or whether it's just random people within a realm of influence, I don't know. I think maybe it's kind of inevitable that society, people as individuals as a whole, are looking to be ruled by a small group or one person or whatever. Anyway, she's kind of making the argument that, in questioning, that there is no way to opt out of like a social contract, that like literally you're born into it and cannot go off on your own. Though like that may not even be a good thing itself, but it's difficult today in these times to just leave any nation state and find somewhere else to go, or even just be on your own. That only oligarchs and elites have ultimate say in changing or redefining social contracts themselves. And so the solution that Lady Elm is purporting here is like that they need to use their and maybe specifically her own influence to peacefully protest to those like running the prison or like the surrounding cities' elected officials in order to like find release from the prison to go through like the actual government through peaceful protest. So the next one is the Science Mountain, and that one is handled by the Black Knight. And the Black Knight is making the argument here of the problema being that science has become a religion to itself, that there's a belief that science is infallible and that it's essentially become a worldview. And the Black Knight solution to this is to recognize that science itself doesn't attribute values or ethics, that science is a tool, but not an end all. That they use whatever resources or methods that they have on hand, yet still rely on things like philosophy or ethics in general to like dictate value and the rightness of like their specific actions. That science itself does not have any ethical groundwork within itself. That science actually needs to be ruled by an ethical groundwork of philosophy, that sort of thing. The next one is Parson Brown, his character, and he's dealing specifically with the mountain of religion. And his argument, his problema, if you will, is that everyone wants dominance. That even things like equity really mean for most that they just want to be the first in line, or preferential treatment, or convenience, or moral elitism, or privilege, supremacy, whatever you like, all these sorts of things. That it's my personal view that a lot of people, when they talk about equity, they're not actually wanting equity at all. They just, it's something to hide behind when people really just want dominance, while still bringing about the illusion of being like moral or being altruistic, if you will. That's just my personal opinion. You can think that, I'm off my rocker by saying that, but I'm just not convinced by a lot of people making those kind of claims with equity. And I'm not talking about like equity in race necessarily. It's a lot of other things that you hear about in society in general. And I've heard a lot of people make the claim, well, maybe people aren't necessarily equal. And that, oh, that's raising red flags and all. I think when you're talking about equality and equity as for like the idea of being human itself, 100% for that. But when you're talking about things like merit or like specific, not everybody's Michael Jordan. I don't expect to be making money like Michael Jordan, is all I'm saying, because I absolutely suck at basketball. So that sort of thing is what I'm talking about. Michael Jordan should have made a lot more money than, say, what's his name, Christian Laettner. I think, was it Christian Laettner? He was like a top pick from Duke or whatever back in like the mid 90s. Seemed to do good in the NCAA, but once he went pro, nobody cared. So should he be making as much money as Michael Jordan? I don't think so. And Christian Laettner was just a lily white dude, so what does that say? I don't know. But moving on, the solution that Parson Brown is purporting in this is a need for transcendence, at least in a spiritual sense. To not think too much about like a situation itself of like being in the prison, but looking like towards the afterlife. That seems to be his answer, which that's personally something that I'm not necessarily that much for. I'm not trying to make like a value statement of whether or not that's a good view or not, because a lot of people do make that argument and it's a valid argument. That's all I'm trying to like show in this stuff is these different solutions, different possible solutions. So the next one is the from the character Master Bates, and he's specifically dealing with a business mountain. And so he makes the argument of the problema being, an oversaturation of many things within society, that there's always this like desire or want for money and attention, and how like products and brands become synonymous with social movements instead of just existing as what they are, just products and services. That's something I 100% believe. Like, why can't a product just be a product and not be synonymous with a social movement? Like, I buy a product because I need it for, something that I'm doing or whatever. I'm not doing it to support some sort of social cause. and that sort of idea of branding is just really, really weird to me, and honestly leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So the solution that he's dealing with is like that they need to invest and save their money towards getting out of the prison, and like specifically like to bribe the guards or wardens with the money that they have. And maybe like that one's a little more spot on the nose when it comes to like the story of how are we going to get out of the prison. But I guess like the underlying principle of what this deals with in the area of like business in general within society is that like money is power, and being able to have enough resources on your own so that you can sort of make your own rules. And then okay, the next one that I have is that the protagonist himself. And the protagonist doesn't represent any specific mountain. Maybe it's like the eighth one. He's sort of the odd man out, and his dialogue specifically represents the musical section where it gets like softer, and there's this like really clean guitar part with this like heavy chorus going on. And he's kind of dealing more with the aspect of maybe them all aligning together under like Jesus, spiritually speaking, but just them kind of coming together and saying, I may not know like the specific how to or what like a specific solution is, but if there is any specific solution, it's going to be found in us completely agreeing and standing together no matter what that solution may be. That like we cannot sever the bonds that bring us together as like a collective, as a tribe. And so the last one at the very end of the song is Auteur, and she is dealing specifically with the very last mountain, which is like the arts and media in society, and making the problem, the argument being that there's a devaluation of the arts itself within society, and that there's an oversaturation of like subpar or recycled ideas. So like, one example that I could put are all the like remakes of classic 80s and 90s movies. It's like we're not necessarily coming up with anything new these days. We're just recycling ideas because companies know that they will sell, because they're based on, tried and true storytelling cliches, perhaps, or nostalgia or something along those lines. And then saying also that like a problem being that free speech within like art culture really isn't cultivated at all. That most art has become about political correctness, and that art itself has become a form of propaganda. And so Auteur gives a quick solution, being that they need to create artistic things that speak of like revolting against the powers that be, um, to signal to the world and to their fellow prisoners to rise up, creatively speaking. Um, so yeah, that kind of deals with the literal meaning. Happens after the wedding. They're all in this room together at an oval table. Um, it's nearby like the parsonage, um, and where there's like a church sanctuary, which we're going to get into next, but near where they've kind of taken over this little section of the prison and where they're kind of operating as a tribe. So that's what's going on there. The like fruit of the spirit that this this song deals with is joy, which the Message rewords it as like an exuberance about life. And the amoral step that I hid in the lyrics deals with like the idea of revenge, or rather wanting to inflict harm on others. So like the personal meaning of this song, really it kind of sets up the different characters of the tribe. That's like the main thing that this song is meant to do. This is nothing like really hugely personal, other than like things, problems within society that I personally, don't like. And so it's kind of dealing with, in a roundabout way, like the exploration of relationships themselves, and nothing specific, but just the idea of relationships, and like being defined by having mutual relationships, hierarchies, and like roles within the relationship. I think society as a whole talks about inclusion a little too much. And of course, like, I understand the idea of like having an inclusive environment, but never at the detriment of exclusionary principles. The people within this tribe all have certain values that they hold in common, whether those are clearly defined religiously or whether it's just defined by the value of human life, human dignity, and the importance of having relationships themselves is being exclusive relationships. So in a sense, this song is dealing with kind of like between the lines, the role of the individual versus the tribe versus the collective, that sort of thing. And let's see. Okay, for like specific references that I write into the song, there's a line dealing with taste and see that the Lord is good, which is from Psalm 34 verse 8, and that specific section talks about pineapple, and this is in philosophy, like dealing with what's, I guess, like known as like the pineapple thought experiment, that it's to describe the taste of a pineapple requires direct experience, that you actually have to eat a pineapple. And if you're trying to explain the taste of a pineapple, never having actually tasted pineapple, like that just doesn't work. It will ultimately come across as like foreign language. And this is something that the philosopher John Locke talked about some. And so, like, in this song, the pineapple too, I guess, is recognized as like a Christian symbol, that the plant gives its own life to produce one single fruit. Hence, like somebody laying down their life for their friends or Jesus or whatever, self-sacrifice. There's a reference to man of science and the man of faith, which is a reference to an episode of Lost, the TV show, in season 2, episode 1. And it was on the surface a distinction between the two characters within the TV show of Locke and Jack Shepherd, but is kind of like a deeper aspect, like a reconciliation between, like belief and empiricism, I suppose. Reference to Ecclesiastes, nothing new being under the sun. Reference to first instead of last, which, is a reference to Jesus' words of, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. There's a subtle reference to a crowing rooster, which is, the account within the Gospels of Peter's denial. And there's a line in there, and this is kind of self-referential, and there's like maybe 2 or 3 people out there who would actually maybe remember this. It was a line at the end of one specific section, kind of using chickens and roosters as a motif within that specific section within the song. It says, "Keep your eyes to heaven and not to the cock," which obviously is a double entendre, but that line is specifically, a throwback for me personally. I had this kind of bedroom, just band, if you will, with like my roommate and a couple of buddies of mine. We just would like record goofy songs and stuff, and that was like a line in this song we wrote, going on like 20 years ago. Us just being irreverent, or if you will. So that was just something, that was like an inside joke for me personally that I wanted to throw in the song. Like my roommate and one of my buddies that I played in a band with, they would probably remember those lines. Everybody else wouldn't. So, I mean, maybe it's stupid to, write something so self-referential, but why not? It's just me having fun with things. So, yeah, that is the second track, and tomorrow we'll move on and talk about the song Just Desserts.